I hope you all tried the examples I gave you earlier. Now, let's go through each one together and understand it line by line. Let's look at our first example. Here, we are using a for loop. The variable I is called the loop variable. It will automatically take the different values one by one. The range function here is written as range of 1, comma 6. This means the loop will start from 1 and go up to 5. In Python, the ending value is not included. So even though we wrote 6, the loop stops at 5. This line is inside the loop because it is indented. It belongs to the for loop. Python understands loops using indentation. Since print I is indented, it will run every time the loop runs. So, first I becomes 1 and it prints 1. Then I becomes 2 and it prints 2. Then 3, then 4, then 5. So, the output shows numbers from 1 to 5, each printed on a new line. This happens because the loop repeats the print statement 5 times. So, this is how a for loop helps us repeat a task automatically without writing the print statement again and again. Now, let's look at the second example. In this example, we are not just printing numbers, we are calculating their total. Here, we are creating a variable called total. We are assigning it the value 0. We start with 0 because we are going to add numbers to it. This variable will store the running total. This is called initializing a variable. Now we start a for loop. The loop variable I will take values from 1 to 5. Remember, 6 is not included in the range. This is the most important line. On each iteration, we are adding the current value of I to total. Then we are storing the result back into total. First iteration, total is 0, I is 1. So total becomes 0 plus 1, which is 1. Second iteration, total is 1, I is 2. So total becomes 1 plus 2, which is 3. Third iteration, total becomes 6. Fourth iteration, total becomes 10. Fifth iteration, total becomes 15. After the loop finishes, we print the value of total. Notice that this print statement is outside the loop, so it runs only once after the loop is completely finished. The final output is 15, which is the sum of numbers from 1 to 5. So, this is how we use a for loop to perform calculations step by step and store the result in a variable. Now, let's look at a very practical example. Printing the multiplication table of 5 using a for loop. Here again, we are using a for loop. The variable I will take values from 1 to 10. Notice that we wrote 11 in the range, but the loop stops at 10. That's because the ending value in range is not included. This line prints the multiplication table. The text 5 into is just a string. It will print exactly as it is. Then we print the value of I. Since I changes in every iteration, this part changes. Then we print the string equals. Finally, 5 multiplied by I is calculated and printed. First iteration is I is 1. So it prints 5 into 1 equals 5. Second iteration I is 2. So it prints 5 into 2 is 10. This continues until I becomes 10. After I reaches 10, the loop stops automatically. So, the output shows the full multiplication table of 5 from 1 to 10. Imagine writing all of this without a loop. You would have to write 10 separate print statements, but with a for loop, we do it in just 2 lines of code. Now, let's look at something very important. What happens if we forget indentation in Python? At first glance, this looks correct, but when we run it, we get an error. The error says indentation error. It expected an indented block after the for statement. In Python, indentation is not optional. It is part of the syntax. After writing a for loop, Python expects the next line to be indented. Indentation tells Python which lines belong inside the loop. Without indentation, Python does not know what to repeat. Now, when we add indentation, usually 4 spaces, the print statement becomes part of the loop. This means the print statement will run every time the loop runs. In many other languages, we use curly brackets to define blocks. But in Python, Indentation defines the block. So, always remember, whenever you write a loop, the next line must be indented. Otherwise, Python will raise an indentation error. Now, let's look at one more simple example to clearly understand how repetition works. Here, we are using a for loop again. The variable I will take values from 1 to 3. Even though we wrote 4, the loop stops at 3 because the ending value in range is not included. This print statement is inside the loop because it is indented. Since it is inside the loop, it will run every time the loop runs. First iteration, it prints Python is easy. Second iteration, it prints it again. Third iteration, it prints it again. So the message is printed 3 times because the loop runs 3 times. Notice that we are not even using the variable I inside the print statement, but the loop still repeats the statement 3 times. A loop doesn't always need to calculate something. Sometimes we use loops just to repeat an action multiple times. So, this is how a for loop helps us repeat any task, whether it's printing numbers, calculating totals, or repeating a message. Now, let's look at something even more useful: looping through a list. Here, we are creating a list called fruits. A list is a collection of multiple values stored in a single variable. Inside the square brackets, we have 3 items: apple, banana, and cherry. Each item is a string and they are separated by commas. Now, this is slightly different from our previous loops. Instead of using range, we are directly looping through the list. The variable fruit will take each value from the list one by one. First, fruit becomes apple, then it becomes banana, then it becomes cherry. Here, we are using something called an F string. The letter F before the string allows us to insert variables inside curly brackets. Whatever value fruit has in that iteration will be placed inside the sentence. First iteration, fruit is apple, so it prints I like apple. Second iteration, fruit is banana, so it prints I like banana. Third iteration, fruit is cherry, so it prints I like cherry. So the loop runs 3 times, once for each item in the list. When we loop through a list, we don't need numbers. Python automatically gives us each item one by one. In this type of loop, the variable name can be anything. I used fruit because it makes sense. Always choose meaningful variable names. So, this is how we use a for loop to work with real data, not just numbers, but actual items stored in a list. Today, we learned how powerful for loops are, from basic repetition to advanced concepts like enumerate, zip, nested loops, and list comprehension. Mastering loops is a big step toward becoming confident in Python. Practice these examples, experiment with them, and soon writing loops will feel natural. I will see you in the next video.